We have former ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor, Ambassador John Bolton. Ambassador, good to see you. I've been saying for weeks, for months, we need to step up our sanctions on China. Forget North Korea at this point. China may be the one that holds the key. Do you think that that's the direction now that the White House is going? They already sanctioned one Chinese bank. Might there be more?
Well, I think there certainly will be more on the North Korea front, but I think the kinds of steps that they're talking about today and others that may follow really stem more from the president's view, correct in my estimation, that China is pursuing mercantilist policies inside the WTO, what should be a free trade regime. China is abusing its membership in the WTO to pursue a dirigiste policy, and it's his feeling he's going to strike back. I think.
So give me examples. Give me examples of where they are basically abusing our goodwill, in which they are exploiting free trade for their benefit.
Well, I think there are a lot. For example, in the focus for today in intellectual property, I think if you speak to American or European companies that invest in or trade or do business with China, the threat to not just high-tech intellectual property, but even things like copyrights and trademarks, China counterfeiting goods that are brought into the country is very, very real. People think there's discrimination.
Can I ask you a question there?
Sure.
Why do business in China? I mean, if the typical sort of marketplace is at work, wouldn't you say that's too big of a risk? Why do I even want to bring my intellectual property into China for fear that they might steal it, Ambassador?
Well, it's a very good question. You know, I once asked a senior official of Microsoft some years back how they put up with it, and his, I thought, rather blithe answer was, well, by the time they get around to counterfeiting our software and manufacturing it, we're already a couple generations down the road. So they're not really stealing anything from us. We've already gotten the economic value out of their investment. I think what Microsoft and others have missed is that ultimately the Chinese, having counterfeited X generations of intellectual property, jump over their competitors and use all that to their advantage. So I think it's a very serious problem. I think intellectual property is something that is so intimately involved with the future of economic success that when China steals from us on a whole range of things, including jet fighter technology, that it's something to take very seriously. And that doesn't even count the preferences that China gives to their own investors in domestic markets, especially state-owned enterprises.
But we've let this go, Ambassador. We've let it all go.
Of course, yeah, that's exactly right. And I think this is a problem generally with American diplomacy, whether it's in the trade area. I used to see it in the arms control area, that somehow our career bureaucracy just finds it difficult to say country X is violating its commitments. I used to call it the V word. They just can't get themselves to say it. I don't think President Trump is going to have any trouble saying it.
But see, that's important right now. Because, you know, as we talk about North Korea and we talk about the importance of China cracking down on North Korea because they may, in fact, hold the key to be able to tame this guy, you know, China doesn't necessarily need to do it because we haven't exerted enough pressure on China. Now, this is one way we could, and frankly, one way we should have been for years.
Yeah, I don't think we will exert enough pressure on China to hurt China economically because of North Korea. Pinprick sanctions, so-called targeted sanctions going after this bank or that individual are not going to do it, because if you sanction the ABC bank, amazingly the next day the XYZ bank springs up and does what you were concerned about before. I think it takes really massive economic sanctions, and that won't happen because we would bear pain too, and I just don't see the business community
well, then that's
it.
discouraging, Ambassador. I mean, if you're telling me we can't put these sanctions in place the way we need to, how do we combat the intellectual property theft, and how do we combat the craziness brewing in North Korea?
Well, because I think there's a difference between using sanctions and retaliation for unfair trade practices in the economic sphere than trying to leverage economic power into the political sphere. I think it's a lot harder in the political sphere. I think calling China out on its violations of its WTO obligations and others really is a way of shaming them, and I think that does affect China. And so this is certainly something the president's going to try, as you said before, correctly. Other presidents have not tried it.
No,
it's obviously not working for us. Let's see what happens.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to it. He's coming out any minute from now, and we will be watching to see just exactly what President Trump has to say about China and how they have use some of this to their advantage quite unfairly. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Glad to be with
All right,
you.
as we